every woman in my family dies on their 30th birthday. Mine is tomorrow. I'm typing this at 2:17 a.m. on June 25th, and I can't sleep. Not because I'm afraid of dying, though I am, but because I keep hearing my mother's voice calling my name from the woods behind our house. She's been dead for 13 years. My name is Cassandra Me Holt, and according to my family's history, I have exactly 21 hours and 56 minutes left to live. I've spent the last 12 years trying to break this curse, and I think I finally understand what's been killing us. But understanding it might have made everything worse. Let me start with the deaths. Maybe if I lay it all out, someone reading this will see something I missed. Maybe someone will figure out how to help the next girl in line, my cousin Rebecca's daughter, who just turned 15 and doesn't know what's waiting for her. Margaret Holt, June 26, 1943, my great-great-grandmother was found dead in her garden at exactly sunrise on her 30th birthday. The coroner said heart failure, but the neighbors whispered about the way they found her, kneeling in the dirt with her hands pressed against the earth, her lips moving like she was praying or pleading with something underground. Her husband said she'd been acting strange for weeks, talking to empty air and leaving food offerings in the forest. Dorothy Holt, June 26, 1968, great-grandmother Dorothy lasted longer than most. She made it to 11:47 p.m. on June 25th before something drove her out into the night. They found her at dawn, 20 miles from home, lying in a circle of dead wildflowers in a clearing no one had ever seen before. The search party said the clearing felt wrong, too quiet, too cold, like the forest itself was holding its breath. When they went back the next day to investigate, they couldn't find it again. Catherine Holt, June 26, 1993, my grandmother Catherine tried to fight it. She barricaded herself in her bedroom for 3 days before her birthday, had my grandfather nail boards over the windows, installed 3 different deadbolts. She made it until 11:52 p.m. before she started screaming that something was scratching at the walls. The scratching sounds were real. My grandfather heard them too, moving around the outside of the house in a pattern that didn't match any animal he knew. When the scratching stopped, Catherine went quiet. They found her the next morning, sitting peacefully in her rocking chair, stone dead with a smile on her face. The boards were still nailed over the windows. The deadbolts were still locked from the inside. Linda Holt, June 26, 2011, my mother tried to run. She packed us up 3 weeks before her birthday and drove to Oregon, thinking distance would break whatever held our family. It didn't work. On June 25th, she started sleepwalking. Not the ordinary kind. She would walk for hours in a perfectly straight line, no matter what obstacles were in her way. She walked through traffic, through buildings, through a construction site with a 12-foot fence. Security cameras caught her moving with impossible purpose, never stumbling, never hesitating, always heading east. She walked for 18 straight hours, covering almost 90 miles, until she reached a tiny town in eastern Oregon that wasn't on any map. The locals said they'd never seen the place before. It was just there one morning, a cluster of old buildings arranged around a town square with a well in the center. Mom was found sitting on the edge of that well, her feet dangling into the darkness below. She was still alive when they found her, but she wouldn't respond to her name. She just stared down into the water and whispered, "She's waiting. She's been waiting so long." She died at exactly midnight Oregon time, 3 a.m. Eastern, the same time zone where our family's curse began. After Mom's funeral, I couldn't let it go. I was 17, furious with grief, and convinced that there had to be a rational explanation. I started researching our family history, thinking I'd find some genetic condition that caused early heart failure, some environmental factor that explained the pattern. What I found was worse than any medical condition. The first clue came from great-grandmother Dorothy's sister, Aunt Eunice, who was 93 and sharp as a razor. When I asked her about the family curse, she went quiet for a long time. Then she disappeared into her bedroom and came back with a shoebox full of letters, newspaper clippings, and photographs I'd never seen. "Your great-great-grandmother Margaret wasn't the first," she said, spreading the contents across her kitchen table. "This thing goes back further than anyone wants to admit." The oldest document was a letter dated 1892, written in faded ink on paper so fragile it threatened to crumble at my touch. It was from a woman named Sarah Holt, Margaret's mother-in-law, to her sister in Virginia. The Campbell woman came to me again last night. She says the debt must be paid, that what was borrowed must be returned. I tried to tell her that I never borrowed nothing from nobody, but she just smiled with those black teeth and said the debt weren't mine to begin with. She said it started with the first woman to set foot on this land, and it won't end until the last one leaves. I don't know what she means, but I'm afraid. The baby's due in 3 months, and I can't shake the feeling that I'm bringing her into something terrible. That baby was Margaret. And Sarah Holt died in childbirth at age 29, just 11 months before her 30th birthday. Aunt Eunice had heard the stories her whole life. The Campbell woman was a local legend, supposedly a Cherokee woman who'd lived in these mountains long before white settlers arrived. But the stories about her were wrong, or at least incomplete. Her real name was Ayanna Campbell, and she hadn't been Cherokee. She'd been something else, something older. The Cherokee had their own stories about her, passed down through generations of tribal elders who were careful never to speak her name aloud. I spent 3 months tracking down those stories, driving all over Kentucky, Tennessee, and North Carolina, talking to anyone who would speak to me about the old days. Most people hung up on me or shut their doors in my face. But a few talked, usually late at night in hushed voices, like they were afraid something might be listening. Here's what I learned. Ayanna Campbell had come to the mountains in the 1790s, claiming to be fleeing persecution in the settlements. She was beautiful, they said, with long black hair and eyes like deep water. She knew things, how to heal sickness, how to make barren land fertile, how to find water in drought and game in winter. The Cherokee accepted her, though uneasily. Something about her didn't sit right, even with people who understood the old magics. She built a cabin in a hollow that the Cherokee considered cursed, a place where the earth was sour and nothing would grow. But under her touch, the land flourished. Her garden bloomed, even in the deepest winter. Her animals never sickened or died. She traded her knowledge freely, asking for nothing in return. At first, the trouble started when white settlers began moving into Cherokee territory. Families would arrive starving and desperate, having lost everything to floods, disease, or simple bad luck. They would find their way to Ayanna's cabin, drawn by stories of the woman who could make miracles happen. She always helped them. She would give them seeds that would grow in impossible soil, remedies that could cure any ailment, charms that would bring good fortune. She never asked for payment, never demanded anything in return. But she always made sure they understood that magic came with a price. Not for them, they had suffered enough. The price would be paid by their daughters, she said. The 7th daughter born to their bloodline would carry the debt forward. Most of them didn't believe her. They thought it was superstition, old-world nonsense. They took her gifts and built their farms and raised their families, and when their children grew up healthy and prosperous, they forgot about the strange woman in the hollow. Until their daughters started dying. It took me 6 months to piece together the full scope of what Ayanna Campbell had done. She hadn't just cursed my family, she'd cursed dozens of them. Every family that had accepted her help between 1795 and 1820 carried the same burden. The 7th daughter would die on her 30th birthday, her life force harvested to maintain whatever dark bargain Campbell had made. But here's the thing that kept me awake at night. Most of the families had already died out. The Merricks, the Washingtons, The Clarks, all gone. Their bloodlines ended when the last woman died childless or had only sons. My family was one of only 3 left carrying the curse. And we were running out of time in more ways than one. I found records of the other surviving families. The Brennans in West Virginia had lost their last daughter in 2009. The Kowalskis in eastern Tennessee were down to one woman, Maria Kowalski, who would turn 30 in November. After her, it would just be us. After me, it would just be Rebecca's daughter Emma. And after Emma, nothing. The curse would finally burn itself out, having consumed every bloodline it was designed to destroy. Unless I found a way to break it first. My first plan was simple. I would find Ayanna Campbell's grave and burn her remains. I'd seen enough horror movies to know that sometimes the direct approach worked. If she was the source of the curse, maybe destroying her physical anchor to this world would free us. I spent 2 years searching for that grave. I combed through cemetery records, death certificates, burial logs from churches throughout the region. I hired a genealogist, consulted with local historians, even tried dowsing rods and metal detectors in the places where her cabin was supposed to have stood. Nothing. It was like Ayanna Campbell had simply vanished from the earth without leaving a trace. But the search did turn up something interesting. In 1821, just 1 year after the last family had accepted her help, every Cherokee tribe in a 100-mile radius had simultaneously and mysteriously abandoned their territory. They left behind tools, food, even sacred objects, things they would never abandon unless they were fleeing for their lives. The few written records I could find mentioned the Hollow Woman and the thing that wore Campbell's face. One journal entry, translated from Cherokee by a linguistics professor at the University of Kentucky, made my blood run cold. She is not what she pretends to be. We have seen her true face in the smoke of the sacred fires. She is old, older than the mountains, older than the people who first spoke the names of these hills. She feeds on the life of women because women are the source of new life, and she grows stronger with each harvest. Soon she will not need to hide in a woman's shape. Soon she will walk openly and take what she wants. The Cherokee had known what she was. And they had run. If I couldn't find Campbell's grave, maybe I could find her cabin. The Cherokee had mentioned a hollow, a cursed place where nothing would grow. Even if the cabin was gone, the location might hold clues. I spent months hiking through remote areas of eastern Kentucky, looking for places that felt wrong. I found several, clearings where the trees grew in unnatural patterns, streams that ran the wrong direction, patches of ground where nothing would take root. But none of them felt like the right place. Then I got lucky. I was researching property deeds at the courthouse in Harlan County when I found a surveyor's report from 1885 that mentioned the blighted hollow where the Campbell woman once dwelt. The surveyor had marked it as unsuitable for development and advised that it be left undisturbed. The coordinates were still readable. I drove up into the mountains on a cold October morning, following logging roads that probably hadn't seen traffic in decades. The GPS lost signal about halfway up, but I had printed maps and a compass. I hiked the last 3 miles on foot, pushing through underbrush that seemed determined to keep me out. I found the hollow just before sunset. It was exactly what the Cherokee had described, a circular depression in the mountainside, maybe 50 yards across, where nothing grew. The soil was black and looked rich, but it was completely sterile. No grass, no weeds, no moss on the rocks. Even the air felt dead. In the center of the hollow, I found the foundation stones of a cabin. They were arranged in a perfect square, each stone carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. The symbols seemed to move when I wasn't focusing on them, writhing like living things. And beneath the stones, I found the well. It wasn't marked on any map, wasn't mentioned in any record I'd found. It was just there, a circular opening in the ground about 3 feet across, lined with the same carved stones as the foundation. When I shined my flashlight down into it, the beam seemed to be swallowed by the darkness. I couldn't see the bottom, but I could hear something. Whispers. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all talking at once in languages I didn't recognize. They rose and fell like a tide, sometimes growing loud enough that I could almost make out individual words, then fading to a barely audible murmur. I dropped a stone into the well and counted. I never heard it hit bottom. That night, I camped at the edge of the hollow, too afraid to leave, but too afraid to get closer to the well. I didn't sleep. Every time I started to drift off, I would hear my name being called from somewhere deep underground. Just before dawn, the whispers stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard something else, footsteps, circling the hollow just outside my line of sight. They moved in a slow, deliberate pattern, always staying in the shadows between the trees. When the sun finally rose, I packed up my gear and ran. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, and I didn't stop driving until I was home. But I knew I would have to go back. I spent the winter researching wells, underground chambers, and anything else that might explain what I'd found in the hollow. What I learned made everything worse. The well wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was a threshold, a crossing point between our world and somewhere else. The Cherokee had words for places like this, thin spots where the barriers between realities grew weak. Most of them were natural formations, created by geological conditions or spiritual significance. But some were artificial, made by things that wanted easy access to our world. I found references to similar wells in folklore from around the world. They were always associated with entities that fed on human life force, creatures that needed regular offerings to maintain their power. The wells served as both feeding stations and prisons, keeping the entities contained while allowing them to harvest what they needed. Ziana Campbell hadn't been human. She had been something else, something that had learned to mimic human form well enough to walk among the settlers and gain their trust. The Cherokee had figured this out eventually, but by then it was too late. She had already made her bargains, already set the feeding cycle in motion. The well was where she waited between harvests, where she had been waiting for over 200 years, growing stronger with each life she claimed. And in 5 months, she would claim mine. In February, I drove to Tennessee to meet Maria Kowalski, the other surviving woman from the cursed families. I had to warn her, had to see if she'd learned anything I'd missed. I found her in a psychiatric hospital. She'd been committed 6 months earlier, after she started having what the doctors called elaborate delusions about family curses and supernatural entities. When I spoke to her, though, she was completely lucid. She told me things about Ayanna Campbell that I'd never found in any of my research. She visits me in dreams, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. Every night since my 29th birthday. She shows me things, tells me stories about the women she's taken. They're not dead, you know. Not really. They're down there with her, in the dark places under the mountains. She keeps them alive so she can feed on them slowly, little by little, for decades. Maria grabbed my hand with surprising strength. She showed me your mother, Cassandra. She showed me your grandmother, your great-grandmother. They're all still down there, still aware, still suffering. And she's going to add us to her collection. I tried to tell Maria about the well, about my plan to find some way to destroy it. But she just shook her head. You can't destroy it, she said. It's not just a physical thing. It's a wound in reality itself, and she's the infection that keeps it from healing. The only way to close it is to stop feeding it. What do you mean? Someone has to go down there, Maria said. Someone has to face her directly, in her own domain. And someone has to refuse to play by her rules. Maria died 3 days later. The The hospital said it was suicide. She had somehow gotten hold of a rope and hanged herself in her room. But when I saw the security footage, it looked wrong. She moved like she was sleepwalking, like something else was controlling her actions. And she died at exactly midnight on March 1st, still 3 months before her 30th birthday. Campbell was accelerating the timeline. I had 3 months to figure out how to save myself and Emma. 3 months to break a curse that had been claiming lives for over 2 centuries. I decided Mario was right. The only way to end this was to confront Campbell directly. But I wasn't going to wait for my birthday. I was going to go to her. I spent weeks preparing. I researched protective symbols, gathered iron objects, collected salt and silver and anything else that folklore suggested might offer protection against supernatural entities. I wrote detailed letters to be sent to Emma and the authorities if I didn't return, explaining everything I'd learned about the curse. Most importantly, I figured out how to get down into the well. I went back to the hollow in early May, this time with proper spelunking equipment. Ropes, harnesses, lights, emergency supplies. I was going to rappel down into that well and find out exactly what was waiting at the bottom. The hollow was different this time. The black soil had developed cracks in strange patterns, like a massive spider web. The carved stones around the well's edge were glowing faintly, pulsing in rhythm with something I couldn't identify. And the whispers had changed. Instead of the incomprehensible babble I'd heard before, I could now make out individual voices. Women's voices, calling for help in English. I recognized my mother's voice among them. I set up my gear at the edge of the well and tested every knot, every clip, every piece of equipment twice. If something went wrong down there, no one would ever find my body. The well was deeper than I'd imagined. I rappelled for what felt like hours, my headlamp beam revealing walls carved with more of those shifting symbols. The whispers grew louder as I descended, until they were almost deafening. 50 feet down. 100. 200. The walls gradually widened, until I was descending through a vast underground chamber. My light couldn't reach the sides anymore. At 300 feet, I found the first body. It was suspended in the air, held up by what looked like tree roots growing out of the chamber walls. The woman was perfectly preserved, her eyes open and aware. When my light hit her face, she tried to speak, but no sound came out. I looked at her more closely and felt my stomach drop. She was wearing a dress from the 1940s. This was Margaret, my great-great-grandmother. There were dozens of them. Hundreds. Women of all ages, suspended throughout the chamber like grotesque fruit on an underground tree. All of them aware, all of them trying to communicate, all of them trapped in an endless living death. At the bottom of the chamber, I found Ayanna Campbell. She wasn't human. She never had been. The thing that called itself Ayanna Campbell was a massive fungal growth that filled the bottom of the underground chamber. It looked like a cross between a mushroom and a jellyfish, its translucent flesh pulsing with veins of bioluminescent fluid. Thousands of root-like tendrils extended from its body, connecting it to the suspended women. It was feeding on them. Not just their life force, but their memories, their experiences, their very essence. They were still alive, because it needed them alive. Death would have ended their usefulness. When my feet touched the chamber floor, the thing stirred. A section of its flesh began to bubble and reshape itself, forming something that might have been a face. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once. "Cassandra me Holt," it said. "You're early." I tried to speak, but terror had stolen my voice. The thing that had been Ayanna Campbell smiled with lips made of fungal matter. "I've been watching you, child. Following your investigation, enjoying your growing despair. You've learned so much, but you still don't understand what I really am." The fungal face shifted, becoming more human-like. More like the descriptions of Ayanna Campbell I'd read in the old records. I am hunger, it said. I am need. I am the thing that waits in the spaces between life and death, feeding on the desperation of those who have nowhere else to turn. Your ancestors called to me with their need, and I answered. I always answer. But the bargains, I managed to say. The families thought they were trading future lives for present prosperity. The thing laughed, a sound like wind through wet leaves. They were so eager to believe they were getting something for nothing. I told them the price would be paid by their daughters, but I never said it would be a simple death. I needed them to breed, to create more women for me to harvest. The prosperity I gave them ensured they would have large families, healthy daughters, generations of food for me to consume. One of its tendrils reached out and touched my face. I tried to pull away, but I couldn't move. You understand now, it continued. This was never about individual curses on individual families. This was about farming. I planted the seeds 2 centuries ago, and now I'm enjoying the harvest. I looked up at the suspended women, at my mother and grandmother, and all the others who had been trapped here for decades or centuries. They were still trying to speak, still fighting against their bonds. What do you want from me? I asked. The same thing I wanted from all of them, the creature said. Your life, your essence, your experiences. But you're special, Cassandra. You're the last of your line. After I take you, there will be no more Holt women to harvest. So I'm going to keep you alive for a very long time. The creature began to withdraw, preparing to send up the tendrils that would capture me and add me to its collection. But something Maria had said came back to me. Someone has to refuse to play by her rules. Wait, I said. I want to make a different bargain. The creature paused. You have nothing I want that I cannot simply take. I have information, I said. I know about the other families. I know where to find Emma, the last girl in line. I know things about the curse that even you might have forgotten. This got its attention. The fungal face reformed, more interested now. What are you proposing? Let them go, I said, gesturing at the suspended women. All of them. Let them return to their lives, and I'll tell you everything I've learned. I'll help you find new families to curse, new bloodlines to harvest. The creature considered this. And what would you want in return? A different kind of bargain, I said. Not death on my 30th birthday. Something else. Something that would let me live long enough to be useful to you. It was a desperate gamble, but it was the only chance I could see. If I could get the creature to release the other women, at least some good would come of my sacrifice. The creature's tendrils writhed as it thought. Finally it spoke. Very well. But not all of them. I need to keep some of my collection, or I'll grow weak. I'll release half of them. You choose which ones. I looked up at the suspended figures. How could I choose which women lived and which remained trapped? How could I decide who deserved freedom more? Then I realized what I had to do. I choose none of them, I said. The creature's face twisted in confusion. What? I choose none of them, I repeated. I refuse to make that choice. I refuse to play by your rules. The fungal mass began to pulse with agitation. That's not how bargains work, child. You must choose, or the deal is void. Then the deal is void, I said. I'm not here to make a bargain with you. I'm here to end this. I pulled out the satchel I'd brought with me, the one filled with thermite charges and magnesium flares. I'd never planned to bargain with this thing. I'd come here to burn it all down. The creature realized what was happening and sent its tendrils flying toward me. But I was already moving, scattering the charges around the chamber's base, pulling the pins on the flares. You cannot destroy me, it shrieked. I am older than your species. I am hunger itself. Maybe, I said, lighting the first fuse. But you're still made of organic matter. And organic matter burns. The thermite charges detonated in sequence, filling the chamber with white-hot flame. The creature's screams were deafening, a sound like a forest fire and a dying wail combined. Its tendrils whipped frantically, some of them catching fire and spreading the flames throughout the chamber. But the charges weren't meant to kill it, they were meant to cut the connections between the creature and its victims. As the tendrils burned away, the suspended women began to fall. I had about 30 seconds before the chamber became completely uninhabitable. I grabbed my mother first, then my grandmother, using my remaining rope to rig a pulley system that would lift them toward the well opening. The other women were starting to wake up, their voices returning as they broke free from the creature's influence. Some of them were too weak to climb. Some had been suspended for so long that their bodies had atrophied. But they were trying, and that was enough. The creature was still alive, still fighting, but it was weakening. The flames were consuming its body faster than it could regenerate. Its face appeared one last time in the smoke, twisted with rage and desperation. "This changes nothing," it screamed. "I am eternal. I will find new families, new bloodlines. I will." The final charge detonated directly beneath it, and Ayanna Campbell's voice was cut off forever. Getting out of that well was the hardest thing I've ever done. The chamber was collapsing, filled with smoke and falling debris. Some of the women were too weak to climb on their own, so I had to rig a complex rope system to haul them up in relays. My mother was the first to reach the surface. She was unconscious but breathing, her body somehow preserved exactly as it had been 13 years ago. My grandmother was next, then Margaret, then a steady stream of women from across 2 centuries. I was the last one out. By the time I reached the surface, the hollow was filled with smoke pouring from the well opening. The carved stones around the well's edge were cracking and crumbling. Whatever force had held this place together was failing. The women were scattered around the hollow, most of them unconscious, all of them confused and traumatized. They had been aware the entire time they were trapped, experiencing decades of captivity in what felt like moments. I called 911 and reported a cave-in with multiple injuries. I didn't try to explain what had really happened. How could I? The official story was that I discovered a hidden cave system that had collapsed, trapping several hikers from different time periods. The authorities were baffled by the condition of the bodies, perfectly preserved despite being underground for decades, but they didn't ask too many questions. Missing persons cases from across the region were suddenly closed as the identified victims were reunited with their families. My mother didn't remember anything about her captivity. None of them did, which I think was a mercy. They all returned to their lives as if 13 years, or 50 years, or a century had never passed. But I remember everything. It's June 26th now. 11:30 p.m. I'm 30 years old, and I'm still alive. I've spent the day with my mother, who looks exactly the same as she did when I was 17. We had lunch together, talked about normal things, avoided the subject of where she's been for the past 13 years. Tomorrow, we'll start figuring out how to rebuild our lives. Emma came to visit this afternoon. She's 16 now, and she's been having dreams about women calling her name from underground places. I told her she doesn't need to worry about those dreams anymore. I told her she's free to live whatever life she wants. I think the curse is broken. I hope it is. But as I'm writing this, I can hear something scratching at my bedroom walls. Something moving around the outside of the house in a pattern that doesn't match any animal I know. And I'm starting to wonder if burning the creature was enough, or if I just made it angry. The scratching has stopped now, but I can hear footsteps on my front porch. Someone's knocking at my door. I think I know who it is. Update 11:47 p.m. I was wrong. It's not Ayanna Campbell at my door. It's all the women I couldn't save. The ones who died before I found the well. The ones who were too weak to survive the fire. The ones who were taken by other creatures in other places. They're standing in my yard, dozens of them, all staring at my house with eyes like black water. They're not threatening, they're just watching. Waiting. I think I understand now. Destroying Campbell didn't end the cycle. It just changed it. I'm the new guardian now. The keeper of the knowledge, the one who remembers. When other families cry out in desperation, when other creatures offer bargains that seem too good to be true, I'll be there to stop them. I'll be there to save the ones I can, and remember the ones I can't. The women in my yard are nodding now, like they approve. They're starting to fade, returning to whatever rest they can find. But before they go, I hear my mother's voice, clear and strong. Thank you, baby girl. Thank you for bringing us home. They're gone now. The yard is empty. The scratching has stopped. I'm 30 years old, and I'm alive, and tomorrow I start a new kind of life. A life spent making sure no other families have to pay the price mine did. A life spent hunting the things that hunt us. I have work to do. If you're reading this, and you recognize your family's story and mine, if you've heard whispers about women who die too young or bargains made in desperate times, please reach out. I have resources now, knowledge, connections with people who understand these things. You don't have to face this alone. And if you're something else, something that feeds on human desperation and thinks our families are yours to harvest, well, you should know that I'm coming for you. I remember every woman you've taken. And I'm going to make sure you pay for every single one.